So over this past weekend, April 11th and 12th, I had decided to take a ride towards tornado-ravaged Fairdale, Illinois, which is about 90 minutes west of Chicago. And before I left, I started a GoFundMe fundraising effort, which, thanks in part to several of my generous friends and family, raised nearly $400 in just about a day. So I had used this money in a few different ways. The first was for cleanup supplies. I brought in 2 wheelbarrows, a handful of shovels, about a dozen pairs of durable work gloves, just all things that were badly needed in the area. And the remaining amount of money, it was used to purchase food and water that was being collected for anyone who was in need. Fast forward to the morning of Saturday the 11th. I arrived in the area around 11:30 in the morning. I headed over to one of the places in which the volunteer efforts were being coordinated from. Unfortunately, they mentioned all the volunteers for the day had already been through the orientation and were dispersed, so I was told to come back the next day. I left, and while I was admittedly frustrated, I decided I would drive around from town to town just to see what the damage was like, and of course, to see where I could potentially help independently. I honestly don't think I have the words to describe what the scene was like. Pieces of houses scattered all over what once were quiet residential streets, personal belongings which I'm sure families would love to have back, cars crushed and mangled so badly that they were unrecognizable. The list goes on and on. I even found a half sheet of paper from March talking about a kindergarten reading assignment from one of the kids who obviously lived in the area. The kicker here is that I had never even stepped foot in the town of Fairdale itself, and that's because the area is restricted to residents and the people who they specifically authorized to come into town to help them. So as bad as the areas that as bad as some of the areas that I was in were, I couldn't stop thinking about to myself what Fairdale must have looked like since it was dealt, pretty much a direct hit from the storm. Anyway, the sun was quickly going down, and I was determined not to let the day go to waste. I was determined to find somewhere where they were still in desperate need of volunteers. So I had heard that the fire station in Kirkland, which is the town next to Fairdale, was still in need of people to help sort and package all the food donations that were brought in. So I quickly drove over, completed the registration, and inside I went. I think within about 5 seconds of walking inside the firehouse, my jaw hit the floor. Literally, the entire place was covered with tables full of food, water, and supplies. Not only on the tables themselves, but stacked so high and all over the floor. Here, I'll show you a picture. This is what the firehouse looked like. That was after we were done sorting, for hours, but we categorized everything by crackers and soups and all that stuff. Just piles of it. It's just incredible. Anyway, it was enough there to make your typical supermarket shelf look empty. Anyway, with no time to waste, I found one of the guys who appeared to be coordinating much of the effort, and I had asked what needed to be done. He told me that the food needed to be sorted into different categories depending on what it was, so the families who needed it could come through and easily pick out what they wanted. I have to tell you, the amazing part about this experience to me wasn't the amount of food donations itself. I mean, of course that was amazing, but the teamwork. My God, I've worked for a variety of companies throughout my life. I've been a part of many different teams. Yet for the first time ever, I don't think I ever heard one no, not a single one from anyone. It didn't matter if you were black, white, young, old, skinny, heavy, straight, gay, nobody cared. Everyone was entrenched with getting the job done because everybody knew none was about them. It was about the people who just lost everything they once owned. Suggestions were being verbally thrown out left and right, and absolutely none of them were met with objection. Instead, everyone's idea was embraced, and if anything, people suggested things that only improved the process. I've never been to any of these towns before in my life. I knew absolutely nobody when I walked into that firehouse. Yet a mere 3 hours after I started, when they decided to stop for the night, I literally felt like I was part of that local community. Before I continue with more about what I did each day, I want to quickly talk about the volunteer efforts themselves. Now, let me be perfectly clear up front that this is my opinion. Some will disagree with me here, and that's absolutely fine. Different people and different ideas are what makes the world go around. I've seen a lot of people who were angry with the limitations that were in place in terms of the volunteer efforts. Many were turned away. Some were given jobs that they didn't particularly feel was the best use of their time. And you know what? Feeling that way is completely fine. In fact, when I was turned away on the Saturday when I first wanted to volunteer, I was pissed too. I knew there were hundreds, if not thousands of people out there who needed help. Yet I was being told to come back the next day. So the feeling of anger, I get that completely. However, I just want to point out that while this may seem like it's a complete failure, in reality, I had to convince myself that it was really the system doing its job. This wasn't a failure, not by a long shot. A failure would have been not having enough volunteers to help with the cleanup. A failure would have been not having enough food donated so the people who lost their houses could have something to eat. A failure would have been not using social media to its greatest potential. My Facebook alone, its newsfeed had morphed into a never-ending feed of events, exchange of information, reports of possessions found miles away just based on the small number of groups that I had joined myself. So are the organizations who are spearheading these recovery efforts here 100% flawless? No, of course not. But you've got to remember the level of devastation that has just come through this community. While it seems like things are disorganized, just think about what it would have been like if nobody was running point on anything. If everyone was doing anything that they wanted, the entire process would be at a standstill. So yes, it's okay to feel frustrated, and it's okay to feel like you should be able to help more than you're being allowed to. I'm not saying that jumping in and helping independently is bad either, but just remember that in the big picture, teamwork divides the task and multiplies the success. Back to the day's events. It was getting late, but based on what I had seen earlier in the day, and just based on what I had been a part of, I knew that the efforts that I had put forth had to continue into Sunday. So I made the decision, and I stayed the night about 20 minutes outside of the local area, just so I could avoid the back and forth drive, plus be up and ready to go as early as possible. So Sunday morning came, and back to the base where all volunteers were being coordinated from. This time I was there well in advance of the orientation meeting, so I knew that I would be able to get my hands dirty with, which is what I wanted to experience from day one. So after a quick Q&A, we divided ourselves into a group of 20, where we were then assigned an area to help with the cleanup efforts. Our group was sent to Northwest Rochelle, which is close to where the tornado first started before taking direct aim on Fairdale. Mind you, the distance between where the volunteers gathered to this house was and to this house was a mere 5 minutes by car. In the area where we started from, you wouldn't be able to tell that a heavy thunderstorm ran through, let alone a tornado. Yet you drive to the house where we were at, completely opposite end of the spectrum. Debris as far as the eye could see. That wasn't even the scary part though. What was really jaw-dropping was just seeing how random the devastation on the street was. And what I mean about that is, while most houses suffered some kind of damage somewhere, I'm not even making this up when I say the house we were working on, all that was left was the flooring of the first floor and the basement. Everything else, walls, everything, gone. Yet the house next door, every wall was still standing. I mean, you wouldn't be able to see much damage from the exterior at all. Was there damage that wasn't visible? Sure, most likely. But again, you have to remember, this is a mere 50 feet, maybe, maximum, between the two houses. I mean, even the tiny bushes behind the house that was destroyed, they were untouched. Absolutely incredible. Here, I'll share some other pictures with you that I took while I was there. This is the, many of you probably heard in the media, the Grub Stakers restaurant that was destroyed. That's that one. Let's see. Here's one of the streets I had walked on. This is off of Scare Court, one of the streets that was heavily damaged. This is one of the cleanup efforts going on with one of the. That's a house that's now reduced to nothing. Just absolutely nothing left. And then there's this one. This is what I was talking to you about. This is where we were. That's what's left. Just that. No walls, no house, just first floor, basement. That's it. Absolutely amazing. Anyway, I shook hands with the homeowner that whose house we were helping on. His name was Chico, an absolutely amazing guy who, despite what had just happened, still managed to crack a few smiles here and there, all while trying to guide everyone at the same time with what to do. We spent the day sorting out the rubble into about 6 different categories to make the disposal process easier, while at the same time trying to salvage anything we could. Chico's wife, who I'm sorry to say I don't remember her name, had told our group that she was desperately trying to find a set of keys which were buried somewhere under the rubble of the garage area. Now, thinking to myself that the odds of finding this were slim and none, just based on the type of debris there was, you can see in the pictures I showed you. I was amazed when one of the women on our team pulled it out from beneath the pile of debris. I didn't see it firsthand, but I was told that Chico's wife was so happy that we had found them. And to think, just put this into perspective, this family has just lost their entire house. And for that matter, pretty much everything they owned. We found her keys. Her keys, of all things, and she's so happy. Incredible. As the day wore on, the debris pile became less and less, which I suppose you could say is good, but once the piles were removed, the devastation really sunk in because you could really see even clearer just how little was left. I kept looking back at Chico as he watched his possessions just being thrown away in dumpsters, just one after another. And honestly, I don't know how he was able to stand there, because I'm not sure I would have had the stamina if I was in that position. I honestly don't. I walked over and I stood on what used to be their wood floor at one side of their house. And you could visually exactly see where every room once stood. Not only every room, but where the bathrooms were, the plumbing, the whole 9 yards. Each room so easily visible just by looking at the type of flooring in each section. We also cleaned up the yard around the house as best as we could, but again, there are so many tiny pieces of debris and rubble everywhere and glass that it literally was like picking up sand with tweezers. Just, I mean, you would pick up some and then it would seem like you got no work done because there was so much of it. So our work was complete for the day at Chico's house, and he thanked everyone who had come out to help. He took the time to ask me where I was from and told me about how he wants to take his family one of these days to explore Chicago, but he just can't take the traffic. I laughed and I told him that some days I can't stand it either, but I guess I've become used to it. But let me say this. I thought about what Chico had told me a lot as I drove away, how he wanted to take his family to the city. Let me first ask all of you who are watching this video, because I didn't get Chico's information. Please share this video. I really want this to get back to him, if at all possible. So, Chico, when you're ready, I don't care if it's 2 weeks from now, if it's sometime over the summer, or maybe if it's going to be next year. But when you're ready, I personally want to bring you and the family out for a long weekend in the city. You let me know when you're ready. I'll cover all the expenses for you. I know you'll need a break sooner or later. And as it's been said time and time again, success has nothing to do with what you gain in life or accomplish for yourself. It has everything to do with what you accomplish for others. The last thing I want to say is thank you. Thank you to the thousands of volunteers who came out into this town from near and far. Thank you to all the people who supported my fundraising efforts. But most importantly, thank you to the first responders, the police, the fire department, the medical teams who immediately put themselves into harm's way to help those who needed it the most. A special thanks to the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office, Ogle County Sheriff's Office, City of Rochelle, Kirkland Police and Fire Departments for running such an aggressive social media campaign, which helped everyone keep everyone apprised of the day's events. And if I'm missing anybody, I'm sorry. I'm trying to remember all the organizations that were involved in this effort. You every single one of you, all of you, you are all heroes. And if you agree with me here, please share this video. Thanks.